Good evening. I'll have you grab your seats, please. Good evening. A couple housekeeping matters. First of all, my name is Michelle Rovang. I am with the Veritas Institute with the Opus College of Business. We are thrilled to have you all here tonight. I see some tables are a little leaner than others, and that is not referencing the meals that we're going to have tonight. Just means we have fewer people at some. So if you'd like to consolidate and fill your tables up, please do so. Okay? Secondly, any dietary requests. If you have special dietary needs that you requested or need tonight, let your wait staff know, please. All right? Great. As I mentioned, we want to welcome you to this evening's higher calling event, the Entrepreneurial Vision of the Economy of Communion. I'm with the Veritas Institute with the Opus College of Business, but we are joined and we co-host this event with the John A. Ryan Institute and the Habiger Institute. We want to thank you for joining this evening, and we will be discussing creating a business where all can flourish. To begin the evening with the table grace, which seems quite fitting, I'd like to welcome our new Vice President for Mission, Father Larry Snyder. Father Snyder joins us after 23 years of working in the Catholic Charities Network, most recently as the President of Catholic Charities USA. In that role, Father Snyder was responsible for leading the overall direction of the Catholic Charities movement and the strategic leadership of Catholic Charities USA. He's also the author of Think and Act Now, How Poverty in America Affects Us All and What We Can Do About It. Father Snyder.
Good afternoon, and let us join in prayer. Good and gracious God, we ask you to bless our gathering today and to inspire our conversation so that we may aspire to the higher calling that you set before us. As we use our talents and resources to build up the human community, may it be a community that values not only success, but most importantly, all those whose lives we touch. In our lives, as we focus on the necessary aspects of business, such as cost-benefit analysis, return on investment, and economy of scale, let us never forget the communion that binds us to all God's children. Help us connect the foundational principles of our faith with our business practices so that we always act in an ethical manner so that as we flourish, the common good is advanced. We ask you to bless the meal that we will share. May it give us strength to be about the work that you have entrusted to us. May our time together nourish our spirits and challenge us out of any complacency that may tempt us. Bless the hands that have provided this food and those that serve it. And may we see in this your hand sustaining us through life. May we imitate your generosity and hospitality in every aspect of our lives. We make our prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Father Snyder. What a wonderful way to center us all and focus. I would now like to welcome Dr. Jeanne Buckeye to the podium, my friend. I'd like to bring her forward. She has recently co-authored the book, and you'll hear about that a little later, Structures of Grace, the Business Practices of the Economy of Communion. Dr. Buckeye teaches in the Department of Ethics and Business Law at UST. She's also the interim director of the John A. Ryan Institute for Catholic Social Thought here at UST and has served in various administrative leadership roles, including Associate Dean and Acting Dean of Business. Her research and teaching interests include ethics, mission, and the integration of faith and management, as well as smart business practices among companies participating in the economy of communion. Jeanne.
Before I begin, there's a short video I'd like to share with you.
With more than 2.5 billion people across the planet in need of better living conditions and health care, is there hope for ever improving this situation? A worldwide network of over 750 small to medium-sized businesses. The Economy of Communion Project is a new global reality. Businesses working together across borders to accomplish one thing: no one in need. Share the vision. Share the dream.
That's a brief introduction to the Economy of Communion, and in fact to one of the companies of the Economy of Communion that's represented here tonight, Mundell and Associates. Thank you. First of all, thank you for being here with us tonight. We're really excited to share this evening with you, and the conversations that will ensue, we're sure will be good ones. Tonight is all about the purpose of business and organizational culture and the vocation of a business leader, wrapped together in the unique experiment called the Economy of Communion. And we want to explore tonight especially the entrepreneurial vision of the EOC, which creates a business where all can flourish. There are a finite number of ways to describe the purpose of business, academically speaking, but there are virtually endless ways to enact purpose, no matter how you define it. And I suppose that the variety of organizational cultures that we know about today can be condensed to a few categories, but I'm not convinced that any one category can hold a culture for long, because business cultures are slippery and changeable, always responding, developing, and giving way at the edges. Vocations are the same. The list of possibilities may not look so long for the person trying to discern a vocation. But in the end, each calling is as unique as the person who lives it. Entrepreneurs are special people, and the businesses they create are encoded with their ideas, with their values, and with their vision. Just like people, the grown-up version of these businesses sometimes looks very different from what the entrepreneur imagined. Nurturing and disasters, serendipity and failures, market pressures, opportunity, and growth all have an impact on their size, shape, personality, and capacity. Happy the business that begins with the DNA of good ideas, good values, clear vision, and principled leadership to guide it. It holds in its infancy the promise of being a place where all can flourish. And well managed, that promise can become a grown-up reality. This is the reality to which the Economy of Communion aspires. Through clarity of purpose, through careful attention to culture, and respect for the high calling that business can be, the Economy of Communion wants all of its businesses to be places where people can flourish. Tonight, some of you, and actually I suspect most of you, will meet the Economy of Communion for the first time. And those of you to whom the Economy of Communion is totally new are probably having some thoughts about the EOC right now. Let me try to guess what's on your mind. You're probably thinking, the economy of what? I know some of you are. I did. Is this some kind of church thing? I'm sure that's on your mind. And after you've heard what our guests have to say tonight, you may find yourself wondering, did he actually say gratuitousness? What's that? And what's the big deal about relationships anyway? At least those are the questions that I had when I started out in my journey of understanding the EOC. I was curious and I was confused. It took me a long time to figure out some of the basic ideas about the economy of communion and start with the idea of communion. I don't know why it took me so long to figure out it just means community with an emphasis on unity. Communion. So before I introduce our guests tonight, I'd like to introduce you very briefly to the economy of communion. The EOC has its roots in a Christian community called Focolare. The same woman who founded Focolare in Italy during World War II called for the founding of the economy of communion about 50 years later. Her name is Chiara Lubich, and she was an authentic social entrepreneur. She was widely recognized for the ecumenical and social outreach of her work, and through the Focolare movement, the work that spread around the world. Now, I believe there are about 2.5 million Focolare around the world. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that number. But people, men and women, families, children, who live in the commitment to a kind of spirituality that is called Focolare. In 1991, Chiara Lubich saw, and I mean really saw, the poverty in the shanty towns around Sao Paulo, Brazil. Though the problem was overwhelmingly large and apparently intransigent, Chiara nevertheless asked the Focolare, who were present in Sao Paulo for a conference at that time, to try to help the poor by establishing enterprises that would create jobs and that would allow them to share a portion of their profits with those most in need. The response was immediate and strong, resulting in a network of businesses dedicated to furthering the cause of unity among people and humanizing the economy through its managerial practices and by sharing business profits with those in need. Today, about 850 companies, the video said 750, but I've been hearing recently that it's more like 850 companies identify themselves as EOC businesses. Most privately held, for-profit entrepreneurial enterprises, they compete in the marketplace like any other business. Among them are manufacturers, retailers, and consultants, educational, agricultural, fashion, and legal businesses. They include one-person entities, employee-owned corporations, and cooperatives. Individually and collectively, the economy of communion the economy of communion companies seek to create a culture of communion or unity by emphasizing core values like the idea of a business as first and foremost a community of persons, not merely job holders, customers, or competitors, but unique human beings with dignity and deserving of respect. The emphasis on the human person in business proposes a view of profit as a necessary but not sufficient outcome for the enterprise. EOC firms are encouraged to share their profits in the three-part distribution system, one portion supporting the business itself, a second part going to the poor, and a third to activities furthering the expansion of the economy of communion. The key to success as an EOC company lies not in economic or competitive success alone, but in the integration and implementation of mission, vision, and values. You will learn more tonight about the EOC from each of our guests, but let me take some time now to introduce them. We have three special guests tonight, and I'm going to introduce them all at once, and you'll get to know more about them when they speak. Jeanne Mundell is president and CEO of Mundell Associates, an earth science, environmental, and water sources consulting firm based in Indianapolis. He's a professional and licensed engineer and a professional geologist. John has over 35 years of consulting experience involving environmental projects throughout the world. He has a BS and an MS in engineering from Purdue and pursued doctoral work at the University of Notre Dame. As part of his involvement in the EOC, John currently serves on the International EOC Commission and the North American EOC Advisory Board, which helps coordinate the activities and development of EOC at both global and national levels. He also manages the EOC Youth and their internship program. As an entrepreneur, he has shared his experiences of starting a business and running a socially responsible company at conferences throughout the world. Nick Sana, our second guest, is another entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur. He's currently president of CXOware. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but I'm going to say CXOware, a software company specializing in the management of cyber risk. Prior to CXOware, Nick led several other successful enterprise software companies, including Netuitive, eSecurity, and ASG. Nick is a regular lecturer on the subject of social entrepreneurship and the economy of communion in universities across the United States. He sits on the board of the North American Association of EOC and is an advisory board member to the School of Business and Economics at Catholic University of America. Nick is fluent in 5 languages. He was born in Europe, what can I say? 5 languages, and received his master's degree in economics and trade from the University of Rome, La Sapienza. John Gallagher is a professor of management, our third guest tonight, from Maryville College in Maryville, Tennessee. And he is co-author with yours truly of Structures of Grace, Business Practices in the Economy of Communion. And I'm happy to tell you that some copies of that book are available for you at the back of the room tonight. Please visit. Since 2007, John has been involved in researching the business practices of companies that participate in the economy of communion. At Maryville College, he teaches strategic management and international business courses, and he teaches as well in the executive MBA program at the University of Tennessee. John spent over 20 years as a corporate executive and consultant in both manufacturing and service industries before beginning his academic career. He's a graduate of Boston College and earned his MBA and PhD from the University of Tennessee. And so now I would like to do 2 things. First, to invite you to begin the meal by eating your salad and passing the bread and enjoying yourselves as our 3 guests present to you tonight. Our first speaker is going to be Nick Sana. Nick, would you like to come forward?
Good evening, everyone. So being son of Italian parents, I cannot stand still. And so I'll have to hold the microphone so I don't wave too much with my hands. Tonight I'll speak more than a dissertation on the EOC. I'll share a little bit of a personal experience. Why I'm here is a little bit of a mystery for me because I used to be, I remember in 91, a graduate of economics, and I did a business school on the side. And I was pretty depressed at that time because I wanted to change the world, and there were 2 things that didn't register with me. Is that all the economic theories I had studied, I was able to disprove them that they were not working in practice in econometric models. Second, all the economical development initiatives at that time in the 80s were not really making a difference in the developed world. And third, I hated business people. Sorry, I'm speaking in a language that I used at that time. And here I'm in a suit and a tie. I hated it because I had the impression that to become a business person, you had to lose your soul. And that was my perception at that time. I remember, and another perception, I remember being in business school, and then at the side of the table like this, we had a nice meeting. I remember this entrepreneur telling me, you got to decide where you want to be in life. You're either going to be a hammer or an anvil. And I'm like, oh my God. This is what it is about? I'm here, I was part of this Christian movement called the Focolare, where we're trying to live as brothers and sisters, put our notes at school in common, we're sharing books and helping the poor, and here I get this kind of speech. And then a business school at that time was very much all about command and control, teach you how to come up with great plans and manipulate people to follow your plans. So I remember going to these interviews to big investment banks and sabotaging the interview because I didn't want to go into speculation. So it was really, I was really lost. And this was 91. And 2 things happened in 91. One is the Pope wrote an encyclical called Centesimus Annus that spoke to me. I lived in communist countries, said, okay, there's a failure of these systems. Private property is good because people can have the dignity of building their own, destiny by owning things and doing things. Okay, that's good. And then business people and governments should work for a more solidaristic world. Okay, sounds good. But I was frustrated with that because the Pope gives me a bucket list, which was admirable, was like a dream, but there was no manual attached. For me, like, I come out of business school, it's like, how do I put this in practice? And I can say 20 years later, it's like, we still have to figure this out, okay? Because we cannot expect the church to do it. They can tell us, it's like, how would heaven look like, and what do we need to do there, but how exactly to figure it out, it's up to us to do it. So that was one thing. The second thing, as part of this movement, the founder of this movement, you heard about Chiara Lubick, visited this community in Brazil where people within this Christian community didn't have enough, some people, means to send kids to school, for housing and enough food. And by the way, I need to correct something there. Chiara did not come with the idea of the economy of communion. She launched a challenge like, how can it be we as a Christian community, we cannot take care of one another? And people said, listen, we already tried to do a communion of goods. We sold our jewelry, we sold our fur, we sold our extra car, and still it's not enough. And she said, what can we do? And a day later, a few entrepreneurs from the back said, we think we can help. With our enterprises, we believe we can give jobs, we can come up with vocational training, we can use some of our profits instead of paying ourselves an amazing vacation somewhere in the Caribbean to help the poor, and we can find a system to continue to attract the other entrepreneurs to this. So it was an amazing response from entrepreneurs, and I was again, in this search of something, and I was struck by this example. For us in this youth movement, it was like a bomb. Especially for me as a business student, it's like, what? I can change the world? These people are trying to change the world through the business? It changed my paradigm of thought completely. And I thought, I was like, oh, maybe business is not that bad. If I can try to live in business, loving my neighbor, like I'm trying to do with my friends in school, where we're sharing our books, helping the kid out of town with his clothing and his tuition, etc., I can do the same thing in business. Suddenly it registered. And not always easy, because I was still encountering people in business saying, I'm Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. During the week, I'm the boss at work, trying to drive the numbers and push people hard so we can make the numbers. And on weekends, I become the normal person, loving person, caring with my family, caring the community. And we're like, wow, I can find now a model where I don't have to have this split in myself. I can be this unified person where on Monday, I'm happy to go to work because I can change the world. I can treat people with decency. As we produce the profits, we can help the poor. We can love our customers. If they don't need our product, I will tell them, you don't need my product. Go find this other company that has a better solution than mine. And find a way to get people who are looking for jobs, finding ways to create more jobs and stretch, the money to find more occupation for people. It was a completely different experience. And this was my introduction into the UC, basically inspired by the example of these entrepreneurs, like, wow, this can be a different thing. You can change the world through business. And it's been a journey, because not like even these guys, they were generous people. There was no theory at the beginning, there was no manual. Now, how does this translate into day-to-day experience? You sound like, this sounds good. This sounds like a rosy story, a happy ending. But I tell you, it's not always easy to put these things in practice, in business. First of all, one thing I realized by trying to live this spirit is that I couldn't do it by myself. If I wanted to have my company I was working on, a community of people that put this in practice, among ourselves, with our customers, with people around us, I needed to be explicit about what I wanted to live. And the good thing is in America, unlike Europe, it's very much accepted to spell your values and say, we as a company have a set of values, that's what we want to put in practice. And so every time I was hiring people, I was telling them what I wanted to do, what the game we wanted to play. At the beginning, these people, this can I say, prospective employees looked at me as like, who's this guy? He's trying to build a sect. He's trying to be a church. No, I'm trying to build a business, but that's where we want to live. And it was very important because I was challenging myself in that. I was, can I say, I had to commit myself to them. It's kept me honest every day, knowing that when I hired them, I committed myself to that. I had to every day walk that line. And second, I was also telling them, this is not just a speech to attract you to work in a company that has good social values. We're going to try to live as brothers and sisters and help others. But we're going to also, we take this seriously. We evaluate ourselves against these values. So every year, when your annual review comes or quarterly review, we'll evaluate not only our own performance, how well we've done our job, how well we contribute to the mission of the company, but also how well did we embody these values. And that's where they started to register with people. It's like, oh my God, these guys are serious about this. And I have to say, we had a blast of an experience. You know, I recently transitioned out of a company and we tried to put this in practice, but we had a blast because once you try to live this way, many people saying you're leaving is like, what are we going to do now? Once we have this experience versus the command and control dictatorial experience we had in the previous company, we cannot go back to the old way of doing things. We want to do this again. And said, oh, listen, just try to be a seed of that change you experienced here, wherever you go. And in your department, in your new company, whatever you're going to start, you can put this in practice again. I had an episode that tells you that, kind of say how to put this in practice. It's not just about sharing the profits. It's also about, day-to-day demeanor. Just some experiences. Not always easy. We had to do our reduction in force in 2008. We're selling to the banking sector. We're selling software that cost millions of dollars. And suddenly the banks were not buying. They're all trying to save themselves. And we had to, after trying to cut cost, save money, we had to do a reduction in force. It was dramatic for us. It was like 30% of the company. And we sat down with the management team, with the team members, and we said, how can we do it in the most decent way? And we decided to allocate a lot of the cash we had in the company for severances and to help people find jobs elsewhere. So here I go, I was the CEO of the company, go to the board and tell them this grandiose plan. And the board looks at me and is like, are you out of your mind? And these were venture capitalists out of, some Silicon Valley, some on the East Coast. And they looked at me as like, we hope that you know what you're doing. And in myself, I was like, God help me. I need to trust that you will fulfill your words, that you're going to get the hundredfold here, because this is beyond economical belief. And I'll tell you a story of 2 years later. I was in an interview with a few people, and these millennials come in the company, the new cool developers, and ask this guy, why do you want to work here? Well, you have a cool product. But then, by the way, you guys have a special culture. It's like, a special culture? What are you talking about? Yeah, I checked you guys out with the people you fired. What did you do? Yeah, I went on LinkedIn and looked at the people that used to work with you and no longer in your company. I called them up. Some of them you let go in 2008. It's like, oh my God. And what did I tell you? This is an awesome place to work because they took care of us. All of us found jobs within a month. We really understood why the company was doing it. They had no choice. And we're still friends. Wow. This was my hundredfold. When I heard that, it's like, this was my hundredfold. Another story. We had one of our employees who fell sick of leukemia. He eventually passed away. This was like a young fellow. He was like 40 years old, newly married. He was sick. And you know what happens in the healthcare system? You get some benefits, and then after a while they diminish, and you get less and less. And he couldn't even pay his care. So he couldn't pay for the drugs he had to take to just stay alive, and try to stay alive. And here come the employees and say, we want to do something. Not me, not the boss with a genius idea. The employees come is like, we met with HR. We asked HR, what can we do here? And we found a way to pool our unused vacation days so we can use part of our salaries to pay for his care so he can get full salary through his cure. This is the kind of miracles that were happening in the company after these years. And then the rest looks trivial. AT&T comes in this department where they bought our product and they ran out of money. AT&T, I'm paying my bill and you run out of money in this department. We need your product. You're gonna stick your neck out for us, and we'll make it up for you. And it's like, really, AT&T? You ask me a favor, $2 million favor to give my product to you for free for a year, and we sat with management team is like, you know what, we're going to do a leap of faith here. We trust these people, and we're taking a risk, you know? We're taking a risk. Guess what? We took the risk, leap of faith. A year later, not only they came up with the money, with the budget was allocated with the exact amount they owed us, but they actually owed it more. And those were some of the experience that we have experienced as a business, but trying to live this life. And what this life was not just allocating profits for the poor, but really trying to live the life of the gospel, you know? And it was in business terms. But I think we benefited from, you know, this giving everything of ourselves and expecting to receive it. Also having the trust and that God will take care of it, and making the plunge many, many times. You know, the gospel talks about, you know, trusting in providence. For us, it was part of the business model. And that's experience not of one business, of many other businesses around the world. So just to give you a hint of what kind of experience we're making as businesses, how much time do I have? Who's keeping up time? 1 minute? Okay, 1 minute. One thing that I benefited from in the EOC was a network of entrepreneurs. You can have also dry patches where you feel you're lonely as an entrepreneur, you have challenges in the company, or that leap of faith into trusting in the providence and not having the light is tough to come. And being in a network of other people that are trying to live the Spirit and hearing their experiences, what they go through has been a big source of support. So being part of a network where you can, with them, experience this life of communion every time you meet with them and share the good and the bad of trying to put this in practice has been of enormous, enormous help. And last, I would say, this as much as about building a new business culture in America and in the world than it is about sharing nice gospel experiences. Because remember that encyclical, Pope said, we need to bring more solidarity to the world. And Pope Francis recently said, he wrote a letter to, the Prime Minister of Great Britain before visiting him in Europe a few months ago, last summer. And he told him, no, we should aim that no economic activity has meaning unless it has as a name to take care of the people who don't have enough. And how to do that, we still have to figure it out. And together, it's much easier. So, yes, we're being challenged by even encyclicals, by documents of the church to help one another in a global way, but it's up to us then to embody it and find a model. And I think in the last 25 years ago, I think business and communion or life of the gospel or faith were oxymorons. And I have to say, I feel blessed that I had an experience where these two things were not separate. It can be the same. And it's up to us now to fulfill it in a way that it can become a model for more people, for many more people. Thank you.
I'll put this in here. Can you hear me? Get my timer on so we keep on this. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Mundell, and my wife Julie and I own 2 Economy of Communion companies in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'd like to thank the university for having us here. This is a real treat, especially everyone responsible for that. Jeanne, thank you very much for all the work you guys have done. I'd like to share a little bit about what it's been like for us over the last 20 years of our involvement in the Economy of Communion to be part of this. How do you live out the values of the EOC and what it's meant to us? First of all, let me see if I got a slide here. I have to tell you, I really believe strongly in the words of Kiara Lubick, where she says, every person on earth has inscribed in the depth of his or her being, whether believer or not believer, the vocation to communion and love. The first question you might ask about that really is, what does she mean by communion? I think that Jeannie said that. What is this word communion? And, you know, to be honest with you, when the economy of communion was first translated in English, we called it the economy of sharing because we didn't think people could understand the word communion. But after many years, we understood that really the word communion is the only word that could be used because sharing didn't capture what that was. So what does John Paul II say about the spirituality of communion? It really implies the ability to see what is positive in others, to welcome it and prize it as a gift from God, as a gift for me. This kind of attitude, if we live it, can create an economy of communion. So perhaps today when you listen to me, don't just think of this as my speech and my story. I hope you could ask yourself, is there a vocation in this for me? If this is inscribed in everybody's DNA, how does this matter to me? So let's start out with a New Testament passage from last Sunday. I was glad this came up last Sunday, this passage. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there was no needy persons among them. You know, when I was young, I used to hear the passages of the Acts of the Apostles, and I thought they were great stories of the early church, how these first Christians lived. But they shouldn't be taken too literally. I mean, after all, things have changed since then, right? How could people really live like that today? Then, as Nick was exposed about 36 years ago, my fiance, Julie, and I came across this group of people who changed their vision of what it was like to be Catholic, and that was this Focolare movement we met at Purdue University. And they talked about living the gospel in each present moment of their lives with whoever God put next to them. For us, it was a revelation and a revolution in our lives. And they told this story, and I want to start about telling about the economy of communion this way because they told the story of the Focolare's beginnings and how during the war, with the bombs dropping and destruction, and all these people, they were losing their homes, they were sick, they didn't have enough food. These group of young girls spread out after the bombs were dropped into the city and took detailed lists of these people's needs and came back and asked, prayed, and sure enough, they experienced the providence of God. They tell the story of having an apple given to them, and they immediately gave it away. And then a bag of apples showed up at the door. And they took the bag of apples, and they gave those away. And then a bushel of apples showed up at the door. This was this lifestyle that came about from these girls, this communion of goods, just like the apostles received these goods from everybody, put at their feet, and they put it into distribution. And so my wife, Julie, and I, when we experienced this at Purdue, we thought, wow, these people are living the gospel. The Catholics living the gospel. It's amazing. But it really changed our lives. And I would say this became our first vocation to a higher calling, this idea of unity, of communion, of the gospel lived. Fast forward 12 more years, 1991, as Nick talked about, the economy of communion came out with people, with Chiara in Brazil, and we began to realize, oh my gosh, we're not just talking about the communion within the Focolare community, we're talking about businesses that put profits in communion. And we looked at each other and we said, this is big. The potential for this is humongous. This could radically change everything. And it became a second calling for us. Although it took a little bit of extra help by God. You know, how do you respond to a calling? I was at work. I was a big shot at a firm at that time, and I was in working on my computer early in the morning, and I felt a jolt in my arm. I thought, ooh, that felt strange. I've dismissed it. A few minutes later, I felt another jolt, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack. But I had another thought. I thought, if I should die at this job doing this work, my life would have no meaning. Well, I went checked myself in the emergency room, and lo and behold, it was revealed the problem. I had a severe case of indigestion. Now, you may laugh about this but I can tell you for certain it was God's indigestion. And for us, it was no turning back. That was the beginning of this new adventure for us. So we started an environmental company. I have a background in environmental engineering and geology. And so we formed this company of one to begin with. And we clean up pollution. We clean up the earth. Today we have about 23 staff engineers, scientists, geologists. And the question you can ask, well, so what makes you unique? Why are you an EOC company? And it really comes down to this idea of what it means to work in communion and for communion. And let me tell you a little bit about that. In communion, for me, denotes both an action and an attitude, the way we work when we work. For communion denotes a purpose behind the action, why we work, the intent behind our activities. So you can have two businesses, you can have two environmental businesses just like ours. They look identical. In fact, we're all doing work out in the field. See, we're cleaning up the earth, we're cleaning up pollution. We could look identical on the outside, but when one company fulfills its services and does a good job, they're done. But for us, when we do this work, that's not the end of the story. If we don't do it with an attitude of communion while we're doing it, and we don't produce communion as a result, we're not an EOC company. That's the difference. It's sometimes hard to see, but the feeling is there. It's the intent and why you're operating. So anyway, Kiara Lubick, when we started this business, gave us a motto: there is more joy in giving than receiving. She's pretty, if you know Kiara Lubick or ever met her, she's an amazing woman. And this motto has stuck with us for 20 years. There's more joy in giving than receiving. I can tell you this is an absolute truth, and you all know this when you've done this, but this is really at the heart of the motivation, this deep sense of joy that we get. So let's see what else I've got here. So we heard the story about Kiara in Sao Paulo. This is the motivation also, because we're doing this not for ourselves, but for sharing the profits to help those in need find jobs, microcredit loans, all kinds of help, support to help them raise themselves up out of poverty. So this is an important point. It's the distinguishing characteristic, this idea, what do we have? What is this new thing we have? What is this? Jeannie was saying, this thing, it's hard to kind of describe, but what is it? It's the best I can say is every moment of every day as a business EOC owner, I try to live with this continuous awareness of the other person to create this business of communion. There are many socially responsible businesses in the world, and you've heard a lot of them speak here, I'm sure. And they have good hearts and they do good works, but for us that's not enough. It's this idea of communion that really is at the root of this. So Nick talked about this idea of relationships, and Jeannie talked about this idea of communion, unity. We see this, the business, the EOC business. Do I have a pointer here? I probably don't. Do I? Oops, sorry about that. We see the EOC business in this kind of relationship maze. You can see some of these where we have the relationships inside the business, all the things that goes on in a business and associated with the business. We also have relationships with the local community and those in need, youth, competitors, suppliers, customers. We see this is our life, building these relationships. And they happen at different levels. They happen at the local level. Well, they happen inside the business. They happen at the local level. And then for us in the EOC, they happen at this international, global level. So let's see. So let's talk about inside the business, if we can. And what I want to say about that is, if I can find my notes here, is that everything we do is permeated by this. It can be human resources. It can be the working environment. It can be the communications of the company. So every bit of this is permeated by this idea of communion. But this is where the rubber meets the road. You know, I could be a company that gives away profits, generates a lot of profits in a year, and you could say, oh, that's great, aren't they a nice company? But it's really how we live each day, each moment in the business that really makes a difference. You know, doing this hustle and bustle of relationships, this messiness in the company, the daily demands, the unexpected events. This really is probably the most significant challenge of living this style, this day-to-day chaos that is business, that you try to have an atmosphere created. And so how do you create this culture of communion in the business? For us, it starts with ourselves. It starts with you. I have to make the choice to adopt communion as my lifestyle as a business owner. The challenge is to get your employees to freely take that on as something they believe in too, without forcing them. Like, oh yeah, John believes in communion. We all better believe in communion or we're out of here. You know, it's not. You don't want that to happen. You want them to see how you try to live it out and be inspired by the beautifulness of it and let them do that as well. So there are all kinds of ways of doing that. When you're a small company, everyone sees you. So they're looking at the boss. If he's living it, then they understand it. If you're not living it, then no matter how many words you say about communion, they won't believe what this is. So when it's a small company, you'll make them believers. For example, the first time our first employee, he was hired, and after a month or so, he came up to me and he was real happy. I said, "What's up?" He goes, "Hey, my wife's pregnant." And I said, "Oh, that's great, Jim." But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, didn't he remember we don't have maternity coverage, you know? So I let him go back to his cubicle very happy, and I waited for a while, and then eventually I had to say, "Jim, we don't have coverage for this." But what we did, we divided up doctors, and we called all these doctors, and we made a deal with a set of doctors that would cover them for a discounted price. If I went there with a check that week and gave it to the doctors, we got something like 65% off the cost. His wife later kidded me when she brought the baby in many months later about naming the baby Mundell and Associates. You know, that's one example. Another example, one time, when you live this way, you try to live in a way to help each other out. So if someone has a deadline but they need to go home, you try to pick up the slack. So someone needed some help, and I wrote this letter. They needed a letter for our report. I said, I'll do this. We need to get you home. So I worked on this letter, did it very quickly, and it was an awesome letter. It was one of those letters, Shakespeare could not have written a better letter. And so I said, "Jim, I'm done. Here, why don't you take a quick review? I'm packing up, and you'll be able to get out of here early." And as I'm packing up and I'm starting to walk out, all I heard was the word, "oops." And that's not a good word to usually hear when you hear that. I said, "What happened?" He goes, "I erased your letter." I wanted to strangle him instead of love him, but really I had to convert. You know, I had to say, I'm trying to love him. I said, "Jim, go home. I'll rewrite the letter because it's fresh in my mind. I know I can do it." And he left, and it was like the Holy Spirit took my keyboard, and I ripped that letter off and got it out. But it's those kind of little episodes where you live day to day. People see that and are encouraged to try to live it as well. So how do you live this? You try to build these relationships among your employees by encouraging communication, by teamwork, and these are typical pictures. This is company celebrations, World Cup events where people are working together. Halloween, I'm just showing you most of the last years, we have all the employees' kids come in dressed up as Halloween, and we get them together and build these relationships. Christmas, we have these Christmas gatherings. We talk about the year. We talk about the EOC. We talk about what we've done with the money that we give away, and the fact that they're the ones that did this. And we've had employees, husbands and wives, come up to us after these and are crying because they're so happy that they're part of something that is bigger than the company. We also have March Madness. We call it Mundell Madness. And but again, the purpose of these, a lot of companies do good things, but there's a purpose behind all of this. It's develop these trusting relationships that they begin to understand the give and take. We also do crazy things. I'm no longer a small company, so at 20 people or 30 people, you begin to lose daily touch with some people. How do you keep this going? How do you keep this this attitude, this atmosphere? Well, you have to make it explicit. This is what we believe. And we do things to encourage that, whether it's silly games of unity or skits we do about working together. They're little techniques. I want to talk briefly. What have I got, like 1 minute? Yeah. I want to talk just a little bit in 1 minute about the local community. What does an EOC business do, and what's the importance of developing relationships in a local community? It's very important. Also about the people in need. I like this quote because this relates to local company and people in need. We say, give a man a fish, and you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you'll feed him for a lifetime. In the EOC, we also say, but fish with a man, and you create a family. And that happens in the local community. You can't just take money and give it for causes or things. You have to invest your time and your people in those communities so that you create this possibility of a family. And I just want to show you 3 slides. Maybe I'm a minute over. Sorry, John. But this is around our office. And I don't have a pointer, but you'll see there's a Mundell office. And we created this map because Kiara Lubick has often told us, you got to put a plan of love in for your local community. Put together a plan and put it into action. Here are restaurants. Here are churches. I could give you a story of each relationship we built with each of those circles around where we live. And it's such things as rehabbing homes in poor neighborhoods. It's such things as robotics support for inner city youth near where we are. It's such things as a green initiative for the city. It's such things as building green spaces, teaching kids about geology, which I love, by the way, and engineering. It's about sponsoring community events in the company. It's about the Earth Day, because we're Earth people, but not everybody's an Earth environmental company. But so what I'm saying is people understand, or the people in your company begin to understand the company is oriented this way when you put your money where your mouth is, and you say, you know what, you can go across the street for 2 or 3 hours every week if you want during work and work at a food pantry. You can go anytime you want to work with youth who need to be schooled in mathematics. So what I'm saying is you need to invest. How do you do this? How do you do this and make profits? You can still do that. People get inspired when they're involved in the community and they develop relationships. And the last thing I'll say is here's an experience we had. And I won't talk about a youth intern program, but we've had about 50 youths from all over the world come to our company and learn about the EOC. This is an experience from the youth called the coffee shop. 2 of our youths went into a local coffee shop. Long line, it wasn't going well that day. The lady behind the desk, something was wrong. And they got up and they realized, you know, we're learning about the EOC, we need to go up and develop a relationship with her. So they said, hey, when they get up and ask for the coffee, how's it going? What's happening today? And she gave them a list a mile long. The supplier wasn't there. She had family problems. Something else was wrong. And on top of it all, today's my birthday. Well, they listened to her as best they can. They got their coffee. They went outside and they said, you know, we're learning about this EOC. What should we do? Let's go across the street and we'll buy her a birthday present. So they went across the street and they bought her a birthday present. And they came back in the store and they got in line and they got up. It went quicker this time. And she looked at him and she said, what are you guys doing? You're back already. And they looked at each other and they pulled out this present and put it in front of her. And she said, what's that? Is that for me? Is that for my birthday? And all of a sudden she couldn't talk. She started crying because she felt these 2 young people saw what she was having this problem with. Well, the story doesn't end there. 2 weeks later, other employees of ours were in the same coffee shop, and she's having a pretty good day, this lady, and she said, where are you from? Oh, Mundell and Associates. Mundell and Associates? Well, you have the best employees in the whole world. That day, all of our employees who went there left with free coffee. To me, this is the epitome of the EOC. A company comes into a community, gives, and in that giving develops a relationship and in some ways helps to transform that community. And the flip side, the community also goes back and does the same thing with this company. And I think that's what we're waiting, the kind of world we're waiting for with the EOC. Imagine if that divine kind of virus gets injected into the largest companies or the smallest companies in the world, what kind of world we could have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to both Nick and John. I'm going to ask for the other John to join me up at the podium. You already heard a little bit about Dr. John Gallagher, so I will not take the thunder away from Jeannie's introduction other than to say that you will be hearing more about their book, and oh, by the way, it's in the back, Structures of Grace, Business Practices of the Economy of Communion. Please welcome Dr. Gallagher.
So, has anyone said that the books are in the back? I'm going to try to fill some of this space in front instead of standing at the podium. So now I'm the academic in this crowd of 3. So now you have to endure a bit of an academic sort of take on the economy of communion. I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't have the kind of inspiring stories that you've heard from John and from Nick. But I have been privileged over the last really 8 or 10 years to be, in some ways, a participant in the economy of communion and certainly an observer of the economy of communion. And it's really been a joy, in some ways, to just ponder what this means for the world of business. I teach business. I've been in business all my life. This is just, the EOC is a constant sort of surprise. In fact, Jeanne Buckeye once described it as a beautiful flower that as you peel or open the petals, it just becomes more complex and more beautiful. And Jeanne, I don't know if you remember ever saying that, but, and I don't know if you knew she was a poet. But I have a very limited time, and so I think my job is to sort of help us think about what we've heard. And the EOC is a very complex, sort of multi-dimensional phenomenon And I really just chose 4 things that to speak to you tonight about, and to really to ask you and invite you to think. So these are just 4. These are not official. These are sort of my take on the economy of communion. But these are 4 areas that I want to touch on briefly. The first dimension is that the economy of communion is a proposal for human development. In some ways, it's a development scheme, right? And when I talk about development, I mean economic development, social development, political, cultural, what the United Nations would address in their Millennium Development Goals, et cetera. But it's a development scheme. It's a way of businesses that are run competently can put their profits in common, and those profits are used to meet the needs of the poor, meet the needs of people in need. John and Nick both talked about this idea of no one in need. So on one level, the EOC is a development scheme, but it's not your ordinary development scheme. It's not like any business making donations to a charitable cause. The idea that profits are put in common, to me, means a lot about the nature of profits and the reason that we look to businesses to generate profits. First of all, this reflects John Paul II's idea of a social mortgage on private property. Profit is private property, but it's really not ours to do with whatever we please, right? There's a debt that we owe to society in many ways for the ability to generate profits. So entrepreneurs put their profits in common, and it's not like they're funding their pet projects or their pet charities, right? The profits are really administered by, in some ways, independently of the wishes of the entrepreneur. And to me, that's a great demonstration of faith. From an academic standpoint, I think this also raises questions about the legitimate use of profit, right? One thing you haven't heard is that the economy of communion suggests that there are really 3 uses for profit. One is to certainly invest in the business, to reinvest in the business, to contribute to the sustainability of the business. The second is to sustain the common good in 2 ways, by contributing in some way, using profits in some way to form the larger culture, through education, through giving, through involvement, through participation. But then also to identify and address very acute needs. And in my book, the economy of communion doesn't leave room for any other use of profits. So it raises those kinds of questions about to what ends profits can be used. So it's much different than ordinary sort of development efforts or charitable efforts. It raises some very, very interesting questions. The second dimension is that the economy of communion understands the marketplace not only as a place of exchange, but as a place of encounter, right? It's not just that we buy and sell goods and services, but in every transaction we encounter other people, other persons. And so it's really from this understanding of the marketplace, I think, that arises their emphasis on the primacy of relationships. Every economic transaction is really a transaction in some way between 2 or more people. And therefore, every economic transaction puts me in relationship with other persons, with at least one other person. And I'm bound in some ways by my faith to treat that as a legitimate relationship. The interesting thing to me is these relationships then exist across time and distance. If you think of a manufacturing business, for example, if I make a product today and it gets sold to a customer 6 months from now or a year from now, I don't even know that customer. They could be in another country, but it puts us in a relationship. And the economy of communion just will not let us forget that there is a relationship there. Also, the economy of communion certainly understands the marketplace as a place of exchange, but they really understand it as a place where needs are exchanged. And if you think about that, you know, customers bring their needs to us. As entrepreneurs, we bring our needs to our employees, our need for their work and their talent and their ideas and their imagination and their creativity. We bring our needs to our suppliers. Employees bring their needs to us. So economic activity is really about this sort of exchange of need across lots of different relationships. And in some ways, it's a web of exchanging abundance for poverty. Certainly, the EOC talks about meeting the needs of the poor, but there are, in some respects, we are all poor. And so it's not just about material poverty, but also spiritual poverty, imaginative poverty. And the economy of communion really views the activity that they're involved in as a constant exchange of my abundance for your poverty, your abundance for my poverty, however I might define that poverty. So I think that's another very telling dimension of the economy of communion. Third, and you've heard this, I think, very, very well from both Nick and from John, this is an antidote, the economy of communion is an antidote to the divided life. This idea of I have to be one person at work, a different person at work than I am at home, or a different person at work than I am at other roles that I have in the community. This is, I think, of course, an expression of the focolare spirituality of unity, right? This idea that the economy of communion is in pursuit of unity. I think it's interesting to recognize that this idea of a divided life means, or bridging the divided life, living an undivided life, is really a way of saying that unity begins within myself, right? This is really, to me, the meaning of a life of integrity, is that it's a life of wholeness, a life that's not divided, that I'm the same person at work, at home, in my family, in my church, and any other organization or group that I'm a part of. So this unity has to start from within. And from there, it can spread to all of the other relationships that I'm involved in. And in many respects, this is the role of EOC values, the values of solidarity, of unity, of community, all of the business practices that you heard from John and from Nick. And fourth, as I think you also have gleaned from John and Nick's conversation, the EOC is a crucible of formation. The life of an EOC entrepreneur has shaped these people, both John and Nick and all of the other EOC entrepreneurs, right? It has formed them in ways that probably no other undertaking could have formed them. Business, particularly entrepreneurship, is very risky, can be very risky, can be very complex, can be very demanding. It's not easy. It can also be very challenging. It can be very exhilarating. The opportunity to really organize, create, establish a business, develop products and services, sell those products and services, the experience of knowing delighted customers can be tremendously exhilarating. But it really is a crucible that these entrepreneurs live in, and it shapes their lives in a very, very complete way. And so Nick, this is a comment from Nick from several years ago. In that respect, EOC entrepreneurs are really a prophetic voice in our culture. They're really a call to live, again, a life of integrity, a life that's not divided, a life that's really in service to all of the relationships that make up our lives. So, so it's very much a prophetic voice. So those are just 4 observations that I've sort of come to over the time that I've spent observing the economy of communion. And perhaps, perhaps this is just my crazy idea, but perhaps it, is some food for thought for all of you, and I hope that it is. I also understood my role tonight was to give you questions to discuss during dinner. So I apologize for these, right? But I'm going to try to dominate your dinner conversation. I also want you to know that if you look on the back of your programs, there are also 3 questions that might guide your dinner table discussion. So one thing you know for sure is that the academics wrote the questions. So again, the economy of communion is a proposal for development. It sees the market as a place of encounter, as an antidote to the divided life, and as a crucible of formation. So some of the questions you might discuss over dinner is this idea of a prophetic voice, right? What does that mean for individual business persons to speak into the culture in a way that's different? What does it mean for business as an institution? What is the economy of communion telling us about business as a social institution, of the possibilities that exist for business as a social institution? And since we're at the University of St. Thomas, you might ask yourselves, what does that mean for how we teach business? Right? Nick had related his experience of business school 25 years ago. But also, what does this mean? What sort of prophetic pronouncements is the EOC speaking to the larger society and the larger culture, our social culture? So you might think about those. In what ways does it personally challenge us individually? I think some of those challenges could be immense. And then in keeping with the theme of tonight's conversation, how is the EOC in any way a higher calling? Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and he gave you foreshadowing. I think he did a wonderful job of crystallizing some of the thoughts that we've captured this evening. There are questions on the back of your program. Some of your tables have already been assigned a moderator, but this is a time that you get to do the heavy lifting. So if there is someone else at your table that would also like to chime in, if you don't want to take on that role, please do so. We have really the next half an hour over dinner, a wonderful, I think, sign of true community to share in this conversation, and then we will bring back the respondents and the panelists to hear your questions. So thank you for your kind listening. All right, I see that our head table has finished their cupcakes, so I'm going to take that as a sign, a divine sign, a sweet sign, nonetheless. I am hearing some wonderful conversations across the room, and so this is the time that you get a chance to ask these folks questions, perhaps pose some thoughts that came out at your table. And we won't have this be overly mechanical. If you can just put up your hands, all run around the room a la Oprah, okay? All right. Oh, I have to really run. Okay. Bob. Bob.
I could project. So one of the questions that we had is about scale. There are companies here in town that have been very generous for decades in terms of their corporate giving because they share the perspective that you all described in terms of the relationship between our success as a business and the health of our community. But they have tens of thousands of employees now. And I know that the culture is not like the culture that you all described. And so I wonder what's the role of scale in economy of communion and in building the kind of companies that you're describing.
John, is that on?
So am I okay? Good. Well, I don't know, we talked about much about our distribution of our size of companies in the economy of communion, but probably 1 out of 5 companies is a 1 or 2 person company. Another 20% is less than 10. Most of our companies are less than 50, and we have a few with several hundred employees. So we haven't had to wrestle with scale in the way that you're talking about. We certainly believe that what we're doing is scalable, but I think we still are looking for those examples of how to do that. How to, in my mind, I've always thought about it that you have a very large company with tens of thousands of employees. Somehow you have to break that into pieces of very small. It's really a big company. There's a lot of small companies put together, and you still have those relationships. So I think it's scalable, but we don't have that experience yet, dealing with that issue. But I think there's still hope of doing that. Do you have any?
Yeah, the only other thought is that I think it's a big matter of culture, because the difference between a good intention that may be philanthropic, we want to help the poor somewhere, and which is a positive thing. Because I come from a region in Europe where rich families who own some businesses, they don't give. They just pass on the money to their children. Latin America, a lot of that as well. So in America, having a lot of philanthropism is a step up big time. But does it translate into an encounter? We're speaking about this at our table, where you kind of say, you understand the needs of the people deeply. You allow them, you make yourself vulnerable to them, you allow also them to know you and have an encounter experience. That requires, I would say, a cultural shift. So that it requires really a big cultural effort in a company, and I think it's compounded in a larger company than a smaller one. A smaller one, I think, leading by example and having critical mass, it's easier than a larger company, but I think it boils down to culture. And so there needs to be a solid cultural program that is deliberate and explicit for that magic to happen. It's my belief. So.
Great. Okay, we'll leave it there.
Yeah, we have a kind of a double question here, or a single question with two aspects to it, and it's the role of influence. First area would be the middle manager, and we've got some folks here that are kind of in that role. What's their role? We've heard it said that unless it comes from the top, it has absolutely no impact. But we have some folks here that are real concerned, are very value-based, and have done some things within their sphere of influence to do that. So what does the middle manager or folks in that arena do? Second aspect is, what's the role of technology? Cell phones and texting, and that seems somewhat antithetical to relationship. Good luck.
That was my line. Good luck.
But the first one, I remember, there was this experience about the founder of the movement who went to Africa, and she met the head of a tribe. When he heard the story of this lady from Europe and what she did, and he says, "You're a woman. You're nothing. God must be intervening here, because as a woman, how could you have figured this out?" Okay? I'm using this crazy analogy to say that, the Holy Spirit and good ideas don't come from the top. Jesus was not born out of a pope or a cardinal. He was born out of a 15-year-old girl and that found herself pregnant, okay? So same thing in an enterprise. Good ideas don't necessarily come from the top. I can tell you that most times the best ideas come from the trenches, when people are where the rubber meets the road, and they develop great insights into operational processes in ways that a manager detached 5 levels removed from the field will never develop. And so in the economic communion, a lot of the discussion is about building a participative environment where good ideas can come from everywhere. And I remember we tried to build even objectives for the companies. I had the first time everybody in the company be part of that process. And many people were not comfortable. Middle management and even first-line employees. Some people just wanted to be told what to do. That was my biggest challenge in that company. Because I tell them, no, you have insights that you may have better insights than I do, because you know the customer, you know the product better than I do. And so you better speak up and participate here, because otherwise you're not doing justice to yourself, to the company, and to your friends here in the company. So I wouldn't say what is the role. It's like it is an integral role. And so the encounter we're talking about, encounter with the poor, is not encountering the poor, and it's encountering the company to make sure that the best ideas surface wherever they come from. It doesn't matter if it's the janitor, if it's the the middle manager, if it's the CEO. So it has the same dignity.
This gives me an opportunity to tell you about what's on your table. There's a thing on your table called the company cube. And it's a way in the economy of communion that we developed to be able to live the values in a concrete way. And whoever, I don't know how you're going to do this, but you can fight over, those are for free, whoever wants to take those in the booklet along with you. Well, what you do, and this relates to exactly what Nick said, what you do is you roll that cube and you live it that day at work, what is on the top. Very concrete, I like it, I'm an engineer too, so. But one of the sides says, value every person, every idea. One day I rolled that cube and that came up. I went into a meeting and everybody was talking about the solution to a problem we were having. And we weren't finding the solution. And I noticed the youngest staff member was not saying anything. And I remember that cube, value every person, every idea. And I said to the young person, hey, do you have an idea what we should do? Turns out her idea was the idea. And I would have never been sensitive to that if I hadn't have remembered it comes from everywhere. So I just kind of agree with Nick that it can come from everywhere. You can talk about technology, but I can say we've seen amazing things with technology in the economy of communion, a great amount of unity built and communion over distances of continents. Yeah, one example of technology. We have a thing called the business-to-business website for economy of communion companies where we communicate around the world. It's multilingual. And one specific example for me is we had some work in Brazil. We were going to go down to Brazil and we'd never worked down there. So we used the website to get in communication with our EOC counterparts. When we showed up in Brazil, our multinational company forgot to pick us up. And we were never in that country before. In 10 minutes, someone from the EOC showed up at the airport to pick us up because of technology. These are all small firms. So that's one very concrete example.
Jim, I'm seeing that one of my former students is sitting at your table. Hello. She's also, I want to acknowledge her as one of the Tommy of the Year nominees. Yay. And in honor of my students who are here, I don't think I've actually said this in class yet this term, but you heard it here tonight. One of the things I like to tell my students is to lead where you are. You don't get to be a leader when you get the title. You don't get to be a leader 20 years from now when you finally earn the position. Lead where you are. Every day, your influence, whether you intend it or not, matters. Every day, people are watching you, whether you want them to or not, and learning from what you do and say. And every day, you're making a difference when you speak what's true and do what's right, whether or not you think other people know or care about it. You got to lead where you are. That gives you the courage, gives you the chutzpah, gives you the muscles to lead when you really need to. And I think, Jim, that's what you're talking about. There, as managers, if we're waiting for people to get a title to have a good idea, we are going to be in deep trouble. We have to let it happen, and we have to encourage people to lead where they are.
So I don't think I can add anything to what's been said, other than to echo and agree. All of us are always influential all the time. Sometimes that influence is for better and sometimes for worse. So I think we all have that sort of mandate. And on technology, I think there's a larger question. In fact, I think culturally and socially, we're all wrestling with that question. about the impact of technology, and particularly the ones you mentioned, smartphones and texting and email, and we're all wrestling with what that means for relationships, and is it redefining relationships in some way? Many of us of a certain generation probably feel that those are not really authentic relationships, but I don't know that that's the final word on that. So I think that's a really good question, and there's a lot of benefits that accrue to us from technology, and at the same time, we need to be very mindful of exactly your question. You know, is it undermining authenticity in our relationships with each other? So thanks for the question.
Thank you for the comments. We had a good conversation about some of the tension. So could you address shareholder equity? It was clear that giving was part of this and reinvesting in the business, but it was also clear that ROI is something that is necessary. So how do we address return on equity? How do we address shareholders? And then what resources are available? Is there a framework that the EOC provides, to like 1% for the planet or other mechanisms that says, here's what an EOC company executes on, here's what the guidelines are, the rules of the game in that?
Great question. John's
I love your question, because it is the question the business people ask. They want to know, you know, how do you guys run this thing? And we've been talking about the economy of communion, but we haven't really given it its full title. It's called the economy of communion in freedom. We often don't say that last two words, in freedom. But that's important, because this was never meant to be a movement where when someone joined at the end of the year, someone will be checking your books and saying, hey, you didn't give that one-third. It's really allows a lot of freedom to choose according to your business plan how you're going to do that. So we have companies where 2/3 of the company is owned by an EOC member and 1/3 is not, and so that 1/3 of the profits goes to that person, and they don't participate in the economy of communion. So there's a lot of freedom in how much is given, how it is given. For example, some people hire people. We have a company, Electromechanica Brescia down in Argentina. They hire only convicts, drug addicts, and mentally disabled people to work in their company. Well, obviously their profits are compromised a bit by employing those people and maybe not being as productive. So there are all kinds of ways of looking at how you reinvest the profits and what are profits. And of course, profits are kind of viewed differently in different countries. And so we have a lot of, what I'm saying is there isn't a standard way. I wish I could tell you, here's the guidance. But it's allowing a lot of freedom to the business owner to try to live according to these goals of a portion for those in need, either locally, internationally, or employed within the company, or providing microcredit loans. Another part to spread the culture of giving through internship programs, attendance of conferences, et cetera, and then another part, not a third exactly, but a part going back into the business. I don't know if I answered your question. I danced around it, but I don't have an answer.
Well, I think there was an answer was appropriate for mostly businesses. Where the shareholders are fully also in control of the capital. There can be companies where the leadership or some employees want to participate in the ESC, but the investors may have come in before there was a motive, and discussion needs to happen. You know, it's easier to be an EC business if in the charter it was established from the beginning that you're going to drive this company in this way. A fundamental discussion needs to happen if it was not the case, and the business needs to shift. And investors like expectations that are very clear, okay? What I would say, you may end up in some of these cases in formulaic can I say, type of expressions where you agree with some venture capital that if you have a profit, you're going to have X amount allocated for certain good causes, okay? But I would not want to, as he alluded to, limit the OC to that. Because the OC is about a cultural experience. It's an experience of encounter in the business, through the business. Then if it becomes 30% of profit share with the poor, 20%, 45, I think it's secondary, okay? So let's not make it just about the sharing of profit. It's that encounter. If we encounter people and understand the needs, we'll feel compelled to do something about it. How it takes shape depends on the structure of the organization.
So there's a couple things that have sort of come out in the answers to this question, and that's this three-part division of profits. So for the sake of clarity, let me just say that the EOC, the Economy of Communion in Freedom, suggests that entrepreneurs, that there's a three-part division of profits, or really, as I was trying to say, there's three legitimate uses for profit. It's not one-third, one-third, one-third. It's three different uses for profit. And the entrepreneur in freedom, and hopefully with all of the other people that are in relationship in that company, have some role in the decision-making. So there's no mandate, there's no guidelines, there's no, it's strictly up to the business itself. But I would say that from my perspective, any returns that might be due to shareholders or any wealth that a shareholder might feel entitled to as a result of investing in the company and assuming some risk, some individual risk, any return to that shareholder, to me, falls under the idea of the sustainability of the business. And so a return to shareholders, in my mind, is a very legitimate use of profit, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, one just only final comment is like we have seen EOC businesses saying, even very successful with profit, saying this year we will not share a profit because we need to make a big investment in a new production line. And if you don't do that, we cannot remain competitive. We'll not have sustainable profit in the future. So for this year, we as management and shareholders say we cannot give because we need to make that bet. Okay, so that's the freedom in there. While if it was formulaic, you may not fall into the category. So.
All right, so I think my question is a little bit more broad, but I noticed just kind of throughout the different presentations that a lot of the words and the terminology are pretty widely general or not necessarily explicitly religious. And so I'm just wondering, like, what role or how does it can like faith tradition add to just, I guess, already like secular business practices that are already, say, the UN Global Contract, which is already working towards, human dignity or sustainable practices. Like, what can a maybe more explicit faith tradition add to some of these business practices that we're talking about?
Jeannie, do you want to take that one on?
Jeannie does.
Oh, sure, that's the easy one.
That's what she was saying. Under her breath.
That's what I thought. She was mumbling.
Well, I'm not. I think we might all have different answers for that, but
Yeah.
Focolare is a spirituality that grows out of the Christian faith tradition. Not all members of Focolare are, by the way, Christian. Never mind Catholic. It's an ecumenical group of people. However, the language of Christianity and the tradition of Christianity is that when Christ died, he rose again and ascended into heaven and remains among us. And so in the Focolare tradition, adopting, I think, now again, you're the Focolare people here. I'm just the academic. In the Christian tradition, it is fair to say, to ask ourselves when we meet somebody, when we encounter somebody as they've described a business experience, who is this person? And the who is everything. It's not the what, is this person a customer, a competitor, a neighbor? It's the who that matters in that question. And the who, the Christian question really is, who are you? And we might all say, Christ among us. We might say that and mean it. And I think if there's anything that this tradition can answer or can add to the encounter in business, it's the Spirit of God we're encountering in the other person. I'm saying Christ, others might say the Spirit of God. And you can't be neutral about that. It can't just be a what. It can't just be an exchange if you're really, truly trying to see in the person in front of you, the customer, the competitor, the employee, something besides a what, a real who, Spirit of God in some way. And I think that's a deeper thing than we respect people, or that we honor differences, or that we recognize individuality. It goes deeper than that. And I think that's one of the things that EOC really can offer to us as a kind of gift in our thinking about exactly how am I reacting to the people around me. I hope that's not.
That was beautiful. You'll often hear EOC people around the world talk about the silent partner. And that kind of experience comes from a folklore style of living where you have this, we try to love as Jesus loved, and where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. And a true belief that if we love strongly, even in the workplace, the possibility exists for Jesus to be present between two people or three people. And that presence creates kind of how we often say, it creates a loudspeaker for the decisions sometimes, because we sometimes don't know a direction. But with Jesus in our midst, that loudspeaker can be heard sometimes. And so you'll hear the Catholic and the Christians in the EOC talk about that experience. Now, that's not the only legitimate experience in the EOC as far as faith traditions, because we also have Muslims and other people of faith in our businesses who have their own faith traditions. But I just wanted to give you a little taste of that.
Thank you very much for your contribution this evening. It's very appreciated at our table. Two questions, or three questions, actually. First, are there any EOC companies in the Twin Cities?
Not yet.
Second question. It struck me that a number of your, what you were talking about, a number of the dimensions has parallels with the movement of distributivism that arose, especially in Great Britain in the 1930s. Has there been any ways in which, as a movement or academically, folks have explored some of the parallels between those ideals and what you're talking about?
Not yet.
Well, the only thing I can say is that in Italy, the cooperative movement actually did the opposite. They had a longer tradition than the EOC, but they were missing the deep roots of why of the encounter. Why are we helping one another? And it was funny, in Italy, these were former communists, former socialists, intrigued by sustainable motivation that they couldn't find in their own experience. That's the only thing I drew there. We probably can learn many things organizationally, because this is still a movement in its infancies.
Yes.
But it's happening in few isolated places.
But I'd just like to say, too, that we all know that Minnesota is the land of Chesterton. There's got to be a Chestertonian out there in the audience somewhere who could answer, or who could speak to the distributive aspect of it as well. But maybe that person's just waiting to start an EOC business.
Yeah, well, there are definitely parallels, and it actually has some implications for scale as well, I think. So, and it strikes me that just the fact that the scale tends to be on a lesser end because of the human dimension is one of the more profound parallels with the distributivist ideas. Last question, based on an observation. You've used the word, several of you have used the word culture. And it strikes me that that's the more significant shift here, that it's a cultural vision. And of course, culture is rooted in worship, and however one wants to define that, even sociologically, that worship is cult is at the heart of culture. And that's going to therefore shift the entire vision of what we're about humanly. And one of the more profound practical implications is how time is used. So we keep talking about profits and in those categories, but I just noticed how much each of you spoke about a different use of time in relation to others. And there has to be a willingness to really shift how one views time itself and the use of time as a resource. My question is going to go here. I want to say this gently. In my work, I get to travel around. I work full-time in the church, and I get to see in different dioceses church operations and the bureaucratic dimension or institutional dimension of the church. And an observation I've made over the last few years is that in many places the church as an institution has bought into, not necessarily intentionally, but just de facto, a secular business model of understanding time and relationships. Not maliciously so, it's in the atmosphere, it's in the culture. On a parish level and certainly on many diocesan levels. And then there are profound implications, therefore, in relationship and in communion. So my question is, have you discovered anywhere or seen a reciprocal movement from your movement, if you will, back into the institutional or bureaucratic dimensions of the church? Not yet?
Not yet. Is that the theme?
One thought I often have, we talk about this as being a model for business, but I often have thought about this could be a model for the church itself. To imagine our own community, imagine businesses set up associated with the church doing the same kind of thing and feeding the poor within the church itself. So I think there are implications possibly for the church in the economy of communion that as a prophetic kind of thing that's happening, that we aren't there yet, but I think I can see that happening in the future.
Just to complete that, I would say that from the cultural perspective, this is a fruit also of the, can I say, social doctrine of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So when the Pope spoke about a vision of what the economy could be like in a Trinitarian way, where the Trinity is an encounter of persons, and what is mine is yours, what is yours is mine, and this happens all the time. And we have this encounter in the present moment all the time. That's a perfect model. How to translate it into operational model, that's up to us. So I think the church can be, I think we are a root, the root is in that Trinitarian vision in the culture. So we are, can I say, sons and daughters of that culture. And right now some of us got into trouble and now feel the responsibility of trying to substantiate that. Can this become practice that can inspire other people? Hopefully so, but we'll do this together. And by the way, it's not just entrepreneurs. We have an association, and the members of the association are people like him, who's a full-blown entrepreneur. Now with a new company, the business is not an EOC business, but I'm part of the association. Students, business, can I say, people, academics. So the cultural dimension you touched on is really at the root of it.
We have a couple questions back here, and then we'll wrap up.
So I'm very proud and blessed to be part of a sub-S corporation, sub-S ESOP corporation. We have 1,000 employees, pretty mature, been around since 1984. I'm just curious as to where you see ESOPs, and specifically sub-S ESOPs, supporting some of the things that EOC, some of your initiatives, and maybe where we fall a little bit short of the mark.
I don't know of any ESOPs in the EOC currently. We have several sub-S's, some LLCs. It's an interesting thought. Why don't you come and talk to us? We could enlist you in the. No, I don't know all the rules of ESOPs. I know obviously that there's a lot that of input that everyone would have into something like that. So
Not yet? Was that your answer,
Yeah,
John?
not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Let me, just a couple of comments. I think there's a lot of affinity between the rationale for in an ESOP and the EOC. Certainly in ESOP, it would seem that one of the fundamental principles would be respect for other people and an appreciation for the other person. Everyone in some way is an owner of the firm and therefore wedded in some ways to the future of the firm, of the company. And I certainly see that as a real, as I say, as a real affinity with the EOC. I couldn't begin to talk about where an ESOP might fall short of an EOC ideal. One of the conversations that takes place inside the EOC, I think, and is probably going to take place more frequently and more vocally is what is our relationship with other kinds of ownership structures and other kinds of business and where there are points of connection to build relationship from there rather than some sort of overarching, here's what you have to do to be an EOC business, but to really just take one step. And I think an ESOP, an ownership structure is a very good step in the same kind of direction.
Thank you.
Hi, I think it's fair to say that EOC is really a call for a corporate culture change. I was just wondering, what advice do you have for an undergraduate student going into an internship or a recent grad going into a new job, going into like a larger corporation? What change or idea can we plant into that mind?
Great way to wrap up. Anyone up there? I love lead from where you are. I think Jeannie set us in the right direction.
Yes.
Anyone else want to?
Lead from where you are. But also, I think, wrestle with this question of a divided life and be really, really clear about who you are and your values and your strengths and your weaknesses. And do your best to uncover that. If you're still interviewing with companies or talking with companies about a prospective position, do what you can to try to understand the value system that's in place and whether it resonates with you. I think that's a first step. Recognize that I think much like we tried to answer the earlier question, from my perspective, it doesn't change your responsibilities. If you go to work for a company that's got values that are slightly different than yours, doesn't change your responsibility to be a truth sayer and do, be who you are and live from your center and speak from your center and do good work. Above all, do good work. That will get you, that'll do a lot for you.
Well, I'll repeat. No, I won't. It's been said twice. But I'd also like to say, just remember who is in front of you. A boss, colleague. Who is the question, not the what.
To wrap up, I have two observations, unrelated. Can we do that?
Wonderful.
One is an advertisement and the other one is an observation. So the observation is, one is the power of the encounter. I studied economics. I did a thesis in developmental economics, and I've seen billions of dollars squandered in programs that didn't work because there was no relationship with the people who were the recipients. And I've seen this. We are blessed to be part of an experience where within 10 years of the start of this experience, all the needs within this organization called the Focolare were met. And now we're helping people outside of these organizations like overflowing. That's the power of the encounter with much less money because you understand the need of the person. You know, if this person is a widower and she knows how to sew, buy her a sewing machine so she can lift herself out of poverty versus giving her a handout. And if you have a relationship, you'll figure it out. If you don't have a relationship, gonna say this is not gonna work. And the person being helped, if there is a relationship, they're not gonna abuse of the relationship. Say, I don't need this anymore. My needs are resolved. So that's the power of relation. Last is, we have an association where we meet every year to talk about these things, these kind of subjects, over 2.5 days. This year, this meeting is in DC. For those who are interested, you're welcome to join us. There is invitations at the back, kind of say, next to the book, which is the most important thing. But there's invitation for those who are interested. Whether you're a student or a professional, you know, all are invited.
Also in the back is a nice summary of the economy of communion within a magazine called Living City, the national magazine of the Focolare movement, and those are free copies. So please, if you have an interest, there's a lot of good material. Please take a copy.
What a wonderful evening and fabulous speakers up here. Let's give them another round of applause, please. Thank you. At your table, we spoke about the company cube. In the spirit of community, you can come up with a trick. Jeannie and I said maybe it's the largest house number at your table. I don't know. Think of something creative. There's also a bouquet. The closest birthday can take that home, please. So that's a way to take those home tonight. You know, I was thinking as I drove in, and I do have the alphabet of grace next to my bed along with my other devotions. But Buechner said today, which I thought was a little bit ironic and perhaps divine, that life is grace, sleep is forgiveness, the night absolves, darkness wipes the slate clean, not spotless to be sure, but clean enough for another day's chalking. So I hope that you all have wonderful rest and begin tomorrow with your own learnings from tonight's experience, because I thought it was wonderful. Thank you.